We are in the eighth presentation. So this final session 4 is a presentation from John Puleston at Kantar Profiles. I'm really looking forward to this presentation. And then our second panel, chaired by Bex from the ASC, with some of her esteemed industry colleagues at the end of the day. So without further ado, John, welcome up.
There's been some really great content today, and what I'm trying to do is sort of wrap everything up and try and actually what I'm trying to do is contextualize and quantify some of the things that Melanie highlighted at the beginning. Where does the problem lie? What are the scales of the different problems? And this is my attempt at that. It's probably somewhat biased, I appreciate, but it's my viewpoint, a holistic viewpoint of all the challenges we face in the industry from data quality perspective. I sort of quantify them as a sort of deadly factors contributing to bad data. I mean, there's a list of 7 things here. I don't really like these sorts of lists type things because they're probably about 1,000 or 100 or something, but these are ones I'm going to highlight and talk about today. And I'm going to go through each one and try and quantify the scale of each one in context to sort of get a rounded viewpoint of what actually are the problems. First of all, we've had a huge amount about fraud today. I mean, I don't need to talk to you about that, the different types of fraud. The industry is doing a lot to try and essentially tackle that. I mean, all the individual providers, our competitors, are all introducing all sorts of fraud prevention measures led by machine learning. I mean, I don't want to overplug anyone's solutions in this area, but we've got some fantastic stuff in that space. And so I had a chat with the guys who were saying, well, how many people are trying to be fraudulent? Out of the 100 people we're recruiting into our panel, how many people are actually trying in that number? And roughly speaking, it's a scarily high number. It's about anywhere to 20 and 30% of the volumes of people trying to sign up to our panel fail some sort of quality checks. So that frontline defence is really, really important, and it's an ongoing battle to get it right because technological hacking techniques are evolving all the time. Right now, it's actually relative, for the researcher, it's actually a relatively modest problem. It's anywhere between about 2 and 6% of people on any one panel that might be deemed sort of like completely fraudulent, fakey sort of content. The bigger issue, the more bigger issue from a sort of like in a sort of fraudy sense is dishonesty. And this is an endemically bad issue for all market research, particularly in some of the developing markets. It's an almost order of magnitude bigger problem at the front end for market researchers. You can have up to 60% of people claiming to have just bought that washing machine you're going to do some research about at the survey. I mean, that's a fairly standard number if you ask that question in, say, India or China. So dealing with that is probably a more urgent, pressing issue for an individual researcher. If, say, 20% of people lie on your screener and you've got a 20% incident rate, that means that half the people doing your survey are not who you think they are. So there's various techniques, and the MaxDiff one just highlighted is a good example of that you can use to screen at. There are, we've done a lot of work. We use this high-low instant choice selection process. So you present people a set of choices, some low instance ones and high instance ones, and you look at the makeup of someone's answers and see how balanced they are. And if there's a preponderance of low instance and not enough high instance, we put them on the naughty step. But within the survey, there's lots of little techniques you can utilize. I've got a whole presentation on honesty screening protocols if anyone wants to sort of get nerdy about it. And, a good honesty screening process can, leave you with, instead of 50, maybe anywhere from 0 to 10%, perhaps. It can be quite broad. But that's a tackable problem through research, better research design. If you look at some of the more broader issues, I think respondent and the way that people answer survey questions and the way we bias questions we ask in survey is really quite a big problem. I mean, there's lots of different factors. People telling white lies, they're embarrassed to tell you the truth in the survey, degrees of social compliance, self-delusion. I'm going to say something about myself that I really do believe. And and then as researchers, we ask leading questions and difficult questions and unrealistic questions. And those sort of melee of problems, I suppose, that we're confronted with are really quite significant. If you actually unpick a typical survey, so many of the everyday questions we ask in surveys are biased in some ways. Just a simple question like, what's your highest level of education? That word, highest, makes people embarrassed to admit that they don't have a high level of education. And so we have anywhere up to 40% overclaim on that simple question. That's a question that's been in existence in surveys for maybe 50 years. We've lived with that bias. No one's questioned it. Now I'm on the SMR Professional Standards Committee with, we're actually, I've been asked to plug this, but we're trying to fix some of these basic problems and how we ask demographic questions. Judith and I are involved in doing that to try and, address some of these basic questions and making sure that we're all asking those in the most inclusive ways. But a lot of the questions we're asking, they're just complicated for people to answer. I don't quite know how to answer. So the solution to this is really a lot of education on how to design questions more empathetically, more, if you think about a really simple question in a survey like, do you have a pet? Fairly innocent question we might casually ask in a survey. You ask that, this is from real data from a survey. We asked in India, do you have a pet? 60% of people say they have a pet. They're not really telling you that they have a pet. They're saying, I'd actually like to have a pet. And I'd like to do a survey about pets. And so just a simple change in emphasis of the question, adding the option, no, but I would like to have a pet, fixes that problem to a certain degree. Now, that's a sort of awareness, knowledge, training. A well-trained researcher would know about some of these techniques, and I think there's a massive lack of that in our industry at the moment. We've really forgotten about good survey training over the last couple of decades, and the automation of surveys, the DIY-ness, this problem become a lot more endemic across the industry. A whole load of bad, instead of having like 5 research companies and then producing 5 different, bad, certain about quality of research which you might question or not, we've now got thousands and thousands of people creating surveys around the world with no training whatsoever, and I think that's something we need to think about. I think we also need to recognise that the very earnest nature of researchers is partly to blame here in a lot of the poor data that we get. I did this piece of research I basically asked people to imagine the personality of the last person who wrote the survey that you last did. What were they like? And this is what they tell us. These are indexed compared to the same assessment of their best friend. We're just a little bit dull. To the point of our nose, this is scary. Trustworthy. We've lost. We don't have a very trusting relationship because we always tell them it's a 5-minute survey and it's actually 25 or whatever. And we're lacking any humour in the perceptions. We're just considered to be really dry, boring people. And so we have a bit of mirroring going on. That I answer when you're talking to someone, if they think you're kind of really dry and earnest, you kind of respond in kind. You ask that group of people what we watch on television, they think we watch news documentaries because that's the type of people we are. So perhaps it explains, no wonder when you ask people what they watch, they tell you that they watch news and documentaries. So there is a little bit of an issue there that I think needs tackling through developing the tone and thinking about these sorts of issues. How do you encourage people to be more truthful? I presented last week at Quirks around this idea of introducing a slightly more humorous tone into surveys and how it improves the quality of honesty of responding, with putting people at ease to be themselves, essentially. And I have a presentation if you want to see that. But in my mind, the absolute number one cause of bad data is basically bored and frustrated respondents. There's lots of factors going on. Survey length is clearly an issue. There is 0.33 dropout per minute per survey on average, analysed en masse. So the longer the survey, the more you're going to frustrate the respondents and the more people are going to drop out. But this is a chart that the red lines is actual dropout and versus the length. And you can see it bounces around. Survey design factors are an order of magnitude more important, 2 orders of magnitude more significant, i.e. you can have a really short 10-minute survey that a whole lot of people drop out because you've asked 5 max diff questions. Sorry, forgive me. Anyway, and then we've done a lot of looking at what actually, if you actually look at what triggers dropout. This is a non-typical, quite long study. You get these are the factors. So you study the peaks of dropout, and first of all, there's a tone and spirit of the survey. They get a sense of what it's going to be like, and they think, no, it's not for me. And then all the other peaks in dropout were to do with essentially lots of repetition and lots of reading. And repetition and Likert scales are the killer of respondent attention. And I've been measuring disengagement levels in Likert scales since actually my early career as a market researcher and researcher, and I've been doing it for a long time. This was the first time I tested it out, was in 2002, when we first invented some survey design software. I measured failure rates, and I dug out that bit of research, and we had a 12% failure rate on people not clicking the slightly disagree to this classic trap question. Okay, repeat that same question last year, 25%. And that's not just, that is a generic panel, that is not just one survey, that's more than one. That is a scarily high number of people who have basically almost given up concentrating the moment they see a Likert scale. Repetition fatigue is becoming a massive problem. You ask the same question in a loop, and this is what happens with the number of answers in the tick box. They just drop off off the cliff after the second, third question. Memory recall fatigue is a really, I don't want to, it's a really, really big problem we have in certain countries. People just can't be bothered to remember things quite in the same way as they might expect them to do. So we're finding, up to 40% familiarity with essentially unknown brands. We put in fake brands and see how many people claim to know it. It's a scarily big number. 20% on average claim to be familiar with any ad you show to people. And so I've done some research to look at what's going on here. If you ask a trap question in a traditional Likert scale, 3 or 4 questions in, they've done a couple, 25%, that's what I just shown you. Now, if I just ask the same question as a standalone question, just the first thing you see like this, that drops considerably to 9%. But if I ask a completely different trap question, like please select the colour green, which is the only difference here is that I'm not asking a Likert, I'm not using the failure rate drops to 1%. So what I conclude from that, the problems that with the question, the boring question, is not with the respondent not paying attention. If you ask them a decent question, in this experiment, I took all the people that failed the 25% group who failed the trap question, and then asked them an open end that was quite interesting about their favourite films. I'm getting up to 70% of those people giving a really good answer, fulsome sort of open-ended response. So my point is that so much of this problem is in our hands as market researchers to fix by making surveys less boring. It's a sort of quiet rebellions going on amongst panelists. Respondents are becoming resistant to the really dry platitudes of research that we ask them. They're rebelling against Likerts, they're rebelling against any form of repetition, they're rebelling against meaningless memory recall, they're rebelling against questions they perceive as annoying. My personal solution, there's only a personal solution. I just totally ban Likert scales. Sorry, that's a bit of a cheat. But generally speaking, no, it's a more endemic problem. We need to learn to develop more engaging survey techniques. Things like recognize the value of a strong narrative structure, how to draw people into a survey to get them interested in answering your survey questions, improving the visual design of surveys. Who would not do a PowerPoint presentation with a few visuals? How many surveys ever go out with a visual? There's next to none. No one thinks about the look and feel of a survey. How many research companies employ a designer? How many people use a designer to create? If you're presenting to 50 people in a room, you probably get a designer, and you certainly think about design. But no one thinks about it when they're sending a survey out to 10,000 people. It's just so fucking obvious, the solution. And more gainful. Now, obviously, it's my bag, so I'm a little bit biased on that. There is another little thing that really bugs me is the whole development process of surveys. This is how a typical survey creation process goes. You got a client and a research company sort of write a survey. This is an imaginary process. They write a survey, send it over to scripting companies, a bit of QA, it fields, it's analysed. This is sort of like in your mind how it goes. Reality, there's a massive, great big whimsical toing and froing between the research company and the client over the questions that takes ages. On average, the time they say the survey will be delivered to you, and actually when it is on average 3 or 4 weeks late because of this little thing. Then that squeezes the scripting process because you've got to get it out because it's running late. And there's a little bit of problems, and that increases the QA sign-off procedures. And once people start getting frustrated, they spotted a problem in the survey, they start to spot all sorts of other problems, like the spelling mistakes and stuff like that. And then that squeezes the field work, and it squeezes, and it's a recipe for creating bad data. So I think a lot of the problems in our industry could be fixed by better operational procedures. This is how I recommend doing things, is sketch out the survey, do a little bit of a light pilot, get a sense of the things you're not quite sure about, A/B test some ideas, identify the best approach, and use that to help you write the survey, evidence-based decision-making, essentially. You have then the scripting process, which need to be allocated a reasonable amount of time so you don't engender mistakes. And then I would advocate a pilot, instead of a QA, a pilot to like 50, 100 people to see what the data's looking like, how the mobile response, then you've got evidence then to decide whether the survey's working correctly or not. You then might want to refine it, and then you're happy you sign it and get signed off and field it. And that I can tell you delivers much better data. And it's a sort of operational procedure. No one thinks about pre-sampling, pilot sampling, and as much I think they should do as an industry way. So, if you look at, I try to work out the scale of all these issues. It's difficult. These are basically JPSS, which means I say so I just made these numbers up really. But, if you take 100 random respondents, you got, 10 of them might be fake, 70 of them now left, you got who might give you truthful answer, you got a whole lot of people don't fail a track question, then you got who they're giving you a thoughtful answer. So, trying to work it out. The problem, my point is the problem's not really fraud, it's nearly all survey design for our industry. And the wider issue, which Arno's I'm giving away my sense of the punchline to this, is the collective impact of bad survey design on panel retention. I've been screened out or I fail. I have two choices on the screen out process: to start lying and over-claiming only things because I'm worried, but I'm always getting screened out, or I give up and don't take another survey. I'm being asked a biased question where my personal circumstances not be taken into account. I can exaggerate or give up. I'm taking part in a long survey. I can speed or just stop doing surveys. And if you look at the declining research response rate, it is scary. That figure 5%, I'm afraid, is generous. That for every emails we sent out, how many people respond? It's actually a lot lower than that. 18 to 34-year-olds have almost given up doing research because they just don't have the same tolerance levels as the rest of us, and so they're so much used to a different consumer experience than we're delivering. So I think that's why I'm saying that I've really focused on that one particular issue. When we ask people why they gave up, this is what their main frustration is: being screened out and survey fails. Without that is the number one issue they complain about. They grumble about bad incentives, annoying questions and repetition, all the other things. Long surveys is actually down the list a little bit. But the elephant in my mind in the room for our industry is not fraud, but essentially screen out and failure processes, protocols. Our industry is operating on a 66% failure rate. That's shocking. So I go to try and do a survey, and I can only qualify for a survey or get through to complete a survey 44% of the time. What industry survives with those types of failure rates? And we need to do something about that. Someone who drops out of a survey, I've looked at this, is 50% less likely to ever do another survey. And this is a classic Moloch issue. There's a bit of modern day jargon, Moloch. Go and search on the internet and YouTube videos, look at Moloch for AI, and you won't sleep tonight. It's one of those sorts of weird, it's not my problem, it's an industry problem. Essentially, my short-term needs to get 10 people to complete my boring 30-minute survey trump the industry. I don't care if I screen out 1,000 people and 200 people drop out in the process, because I want my 10 respondents. It's like I'm only thinking about my own problems and not thinking about the collective negative impact this has on the industry. So who's responsible? There's two things. You could say, oh, well, it's a market force. If we run out of panelists, we're going to have to do something about it. I suspect we're actually at that point. But there are things that the industry can do, and I think it's teasing out the panel debate after this is really to discuss some of the things that industry can do. You could argue market forces is to my competitive advantage to demonstrate I don't have any fraud, and I think everyone's trying to race to improve their fraud detection and so on. And if I design a better survey, it's to my advantage. And if I reduce the screen out and utilise my panel more efficiently, that's to my advantage. So in some of these senses, these are self-correcting issues, but there are definitely roles that the industry can address. And I think we're all here today to try and work out what those are. And this committee is just a fantastic initiative to try and tackle this head-on holistically. What are the solutions within the area of fraud? I think one of the things the industry particularly could do to get together and monitor this on a global level to understand where we're at. Not put it in the hands of a commercial company doing that, but doing an industry initiative where we have that, signed off, and so we get a reliable sense of where we're at. Screen outs, I don't know what we can do in that space. Put people on the naughty step, these bad companies that do that. I don't know if we can enjoy. One of the biggest frustrations is that I get screened out of a survey and I hardly ever get any sort of incentive for that process. So that 5 minutes of my time is wasted. Should we agree some sort of like minimum standard best practice for, make the reward for screen outs on par with the time that they've invested compared to a complete? I don't know. I'd set guidelines for how long a screen out, or recommendations how long a screen out set of questions can be, because sometimes I can do a 10-minute survey before I get screened out. 4 or 5 minutes is quite common. And I think certainly a lot more transparency over these statistical points when we're trading a sample. These things need to become a bit more open. Poor survey design is obviously my territory, and there's lots of things I think that we can tackle. Raising awareness of the poor survey design, I think, and addressing head-on some of the poor working practices is one choice. Education is clearly an opportunity to improve things. I don't know what we can do to improve the quality of survey design training. A lot of the survey design training I see is very functional and doesn't address like the emotional elements of survey design. How to design a survey from an emotional standpoint is something underdone in my mind. I wonder whether we should think about introducing some sort of professional qualification or standard to become a market researcher, to practice in our industry. I mean, there's so many other industries. If I'm a counsellor or a lawyer, I have to sign up to something and I have to adhere to standards. I have to pass a test and I have to prove that I'm operating within these to access our sample. And you're going to use real human beings. Should we not place some standards on people's, capability of doing that? I don't know. I don't know whether that's actually possible or not. There's certainly some best practice recommendations that we can put in place for, all sorts of content elements of surveys. And maybe I think that it would be really simple win to agree some industry standard way of measuring survey satisfaction, so it becomes a currency. How many people enjoyed that survey becomes a currency for completion of a survey. I think improving the feedback loop between the respondent and the people who create the survey, feeding back what people thought about it to people, getting more, what actually happened, into the hands of the people created would help things. Publishing performance metrics on dropout and survey satisfaction maybe should be encouraged as standard. I don't know whether, for example, there's a big debate about trap questions. Someone fails a trap question, is it our problem or your problem? And as I highlight, the failure rate of one trap question, if it's a Likert, is completely different than the failure rate if it's a different trap question. One, you might argue, is a better trap question than the other. So maybe we should agree some standards on that. And what should happen if someone fails a trap question? Is it my problem or your problem? And let's have a fight about it and let's settle that debate and work out how we deal with that. I also think there's a real opportunity to rethink incentives. At the moment, there's no incentive for being a good respondent. Why not offer people bonuses? Why not have a trap question that you don't screen people out for, but if you pass it, at the end of the survey, you get a well done, here's 10% extra for completing the survey, and get people chasing, creating better, concentrating. I mean, it sounds like a simple solution. I don't know how you could operationalize that on a industry-wide scale, but it's maybe for an individual company to do that. And then awarding and rewarding and celebration of best practices. There is no real centralized global reward process for celebrating survey design. MRS awards, there's no survey design category. Celebrating the best surveys of the year. SMR has a sort of had at one stage a commercial version of that, but I think that we should be really, celebrating the people that are getting it right and showing what good survey design looks like and leading people towards better survey design through that process. And then I think ultimately I would encourage essentially a change of mindset about the survey and consumer experience, and we need to work out how we do that. I'm working on the subcommittees focusing on setting some questions that we can ask. These are sort of some of the things we're thinking about, sorts of things that we could put into a set of questions to challenge people. Now, these are just an extract, and we're really, really open to ideas here. What questions should we be challenging people to do? And so Judith and I are very open to any ideas on that, and the whole of the SMR Standards Committee are very open to suggestions on that here. But I put all these ideas on the table because we've now got a little bit of a panel discussion to discuss some of these thoughts and ideas. I hope that was challenging, sobering, motivating. Thank you.
Thank you. We've got a couple of minutes whilst we bring the chairs forward for the panel. There's a few hands going up, so I will just grab a microphone and get one or two questions in while Beck sets up. And thank you. And thank you, John.
Okay, so the first one I'm going to do is I think the way you create surveys is wrong, in the sense that you write a survey on paper and you write it and you create it as it's a Word document and it's very, very boring and very dull. Yeah. And you sit and you write your word process and you hand it over to a DP person who translates it into something really quite dull and boring on the screen. Yeah. You actually need to do it that you write to the screen. Yeah. You write to the screen, you get graphic designer. As soon as you show it to the client as a screen-based questionnaire, they will see how bad it is and they will improve it.
I couldn't agree more.
We've been doing that for at least 20 years, so I can't quite understand why we still got the practice this way around.
Yeah, and I think the ergonomics of survey design processes, PowerPoint used to be similarly created. You'd write it on a piece of paper, send it off to someone to make it, and just putting the PowerPoint into the hands of people to do it, they suddenly realised that it looked horrible. And then they started to add really bad GIFs. But it took us 20 years, but we produce quite nice PowerPoint presentations now. But totally agree. Yeah, in fact, to my team, I never tell them to write a survey in Word. I tell them to write a survey straight into Decipher in the Beacon tool and look at every question and then print it out. Not necessarily. No. Once it's created, you then create the actual Word document for I totally agree. Yeah.
You showed it to an insurance company who's got a different view of how a form should look, and because their view of how a form should look, which is fully tested, A/B tested, is very different to the way a survey looks.
Yeah.
You've got to think a screen first.
Yeah.
For those on the live streaming, we're having a debate about screens, printing, and graphic design. Thanks for the questions. They're really, really great questions.